The State of Israel was created in May 1948. Prior to that time, the territory of what is now known as Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank or Judea and Samaria was referred to as Palestine. Prior to the creation of Israel, the Jews who lived in the land were also known as Palestinians. Palestine had, as Winston Churchill said, been intimately and profoundly associated with the Jewish people for over 3,000 years. The Arabs who lived there were known as Arabs, while the people we now call Palestinians developed their own national identity in the 20th century. But historically, they viewed themselves not as a distinct and separate people, but as part of an Arab region. Specifically, they saw Palestine as a part of Syria. Now, to understand who the Israelis and the Palestinians are, why they're called what they're called, and why both lay claim to the land, we need to go back into history just a little bit. The existence of a people and a society known as Israel can be traced more than 3,200 years to the dawn of the Iron Age. Now, this is not a question of religious belief. An independent Jewish society in the land is a matter of fact, evidenced by historical and archaeological sources. And we also know that this little Jewish homeland was repeatedly conquered by mighty empires, Assyria, Babylon, Greece, and Rome. And like all indigenous peoples, the Jews felt a profound connection to their land, and they fought to maintain their independence and to expel the armies and the empires that wanted to rule over them. But despite two major Jewish armed rebellions against Rome, in the year 135 of the Common Era, the brutal Emperor Hadrian put down the Jewish rebellion. He slaughtered hundreds of thousands, exiled virtually all who remained, and he renamed Judea, Syria, Palestina. You see, Hadrian thought that by destroying the holy places, by killing its people, by even renaming their homeland, he could break the bonds of peoplehood, and the Jews would simply disappear. But he underestimated the connection between a native people and their land. The Jews never forgot their homeland, and always tried to return to it. But despite there being a continuous Jewish presence there, the land would remain in the hands of foreign powers for the next 1,800 years. In the 7th century, Palestine was conquered by armies from the Arabian Peninsula, and with that began the presence of an Arab community there. In the 7th and 8th centuries, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque were built by the Arab conquerors in Jerusalem on the ruins of the Jewish temple that had been destroyed by the Romans. The Ottoman Turkish Empire conquered the land in the 1500s, and over the next 400 years, the population of what came to be known as Palestine began to sharply change. Between 1880 and 1919, the number of Arabs in the coastal city of Haifa swelled by 13 times as migrant workers moved in search of economic opportunities. Thousands of Egyptian draft dodgers settled in the land before the Ottoman-Egyptian War of 1831, and some 30,000 Syrians would cross into Palestine as well. Now, the Jewish population was growing too, adding to the ancient communities in places like Tzfat, Tiberias, and of course Jerusalem. Jewish peasants and refugees began returning to the land from which their forefathers had been expelled out of an emotional or religious compulsion, and often fleeing racist violence in Europe and the Middle East. Around the beginning of the 20th century, massacres of Jewish communities were carried out in places like Russia, Moldova, and Yemen, and Jews tried to return to their ancient homeland in ever greater numbers. Fundraising and humanitarian efforts began in an effort to purchase land to allow these refugees to settle and develop their ancient homeland through agriculture. Now, these campaigns enabled the lawful purchase of land, often at highly inflated prices, charged by absentee landowners who exploited the desperation of the fleeing Jews. The sand dunes outside Jaffa were purchased for the establishment of Tel Aviv. In 1909, Degania, the first communal farm or kibbutz, was established, and those who lived there shared ownership of the means of production and equally distributed the produce and proceeds of sale in a socialist model that would be replicated throughout the land. And since 1901, some 250 million trees have been planted in the land in one of the greatest environmental feats of modern times. But racist laws handed down by the Ottoman authorities made it illegal for a Jew to purchase land. These laws actually remain in effect to this day in areas under Palestinian control, where selling land to a Jewish person is a crime punishable by death. The Ottomans also expelled 18,000 Jews in 1914, again keeping the number of Jews in Palestine deliberately and artificially low. Finally, the Ottoman Empire collapsed during World War I, and all the lands they controlled in the Middle East, including Palestine, were designated to return to their native peoples. 7 new and independent Arab states were created in this process, including in eastern Palestine, which became Jordan, while the western part of Palestine was intended to return to the Jews. But when a further division of Palestine was recommended in 1937 to create a Jewish homeland and another Arab state in the western part of Palestine, the Arab side rejected it, refusing to accept a Jewish state on just 4% of Palestine, or for even a single Jew to remain in the land, despite an unbroken history of 3,000 years there. In 1947, the United Nations again recommended partition and the creation of 2 states for 2 peoples. The Jews, remember they were still called Palestinians then, accepted this, but the Arab world instead declared war. 5 Arab armies invaded the new Jewish homeland, and this caused a massive population exchange, where around 700,000 Arabs left their homes amidst the war, and some 850,000 Jews were expelled from Arab countries, eventually settling in Israel. Colonialism, racist laws and violence prevented many Jews from peacefully settling in the land. It also ruthlessly blocked millions of Jews who faced genocide in Nazi-occupied Europe from finding refuge in their ancestral home. But despite these cruel obstacles, the return of the Jewish people to the very lands from which their forebears had been expelled, to be reunited with their fellow Jews from the Middle East, Africa and Europe, the cultivation of the land, the creation of a modern society that is multi-religious and multi-ethnic, is one of the great feats of modern history. And it shows us the strength of the indigenous spirit, and that the connection between a people and their land can never be broken.